the night Cole Hargrove finally admitted he had nowhere left to go, the temperature in Cutter's Creek, Montana, dropped to 11 degrees, and his truck's heater began making a sound like a dying animal. He sat in the parking lot of a closed bait shop on the edge of town, engine running, breath clouding in the cab, watching the ice form in thin silver sheets across the windshield from the outside in. On the seat beside him, Atlas lay with his head on Cole's thigh, amber eyes open and tracking every slight movement Cole made, the way he shifted his weight, the way his jaw worked when he was trying not to think too hard about what came next. The German shepherd had been doing this for 3 days now, watching, steady, refusing to sleep until Cole did, and even then, sleeping with one ear forward and one paw pressed against Cole's leg, as though physical contact was the only language between them that still made complete sense. Cole hadn't eaten since the gas station sandwich outside of Billings. He had $14 in his wallet and a little over half a tank of gas. His phone had 3% battery and one unread voicemail from his divorce attorney that he had no intention of listening to. Everything he owned in the world was in the bed of this truck, under a blue tarp that had a corner flapping loose in the wind, snapping against the tailgate like something impatient. He was 41 years old. He had done 2 tours with the Navy SEALs in places that didn't exist on any map they showed civilians, and he had come home from all of it standing. He had come home from all of it intact, or close enough that only the people who knew him well could tell the difference. And now he was sitting in a frozen parking lot in a town of 800 people because his wife, his ex-wife, had finalized the paperwork, sold the house in Billings, and left him with his truck, his dog, and a storage unit full of furniture he couldn't afford to keep. He wasn't angry about it. That was the part that confused people when he tried to explain, which he almost never did. He wasn't angry. He was just hollowed out, like a building after a fire, the walls still standing but nothing holding heat. Atlas exhaled a long, warm breath against Cole's knee, and Cole let his hand drop to the dog's neck. "Yeah," Cole said quietly, "I know. If this story is already pulling you in, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. It takes 2 seconds, and it means the world to this channel. Or drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from. I love knowing who's on the other side of the screen." He had found Atlas 8 years ago outside a forward operating base in a country he still didn't discuss at dinner tables. The dog had been maybe 4 months old, shepherd lean, ribs you could count from 10 feet away, sitting in the shadow of a blown-out wall, like he was waiting for someone specific. Cole had crouched down, and the dog had walked directly to him, no hesitation, sat down in front of him, and looked up at him with those amber eyes, with the kind of calm certainty that made Cole feel, for the first time in a long time, like something in the world was operating correctly. He had arranged the paperwork to bring Atlas home. His commanding officer had told him it would be more trouble than it was worth. Cole had done it anyway. That was generally how he operated. Atlas had been with him through 2 more deployments, through the quiet years of transition, when civilian life felt like wearing someone else's clothes, through the job at the defense contractor in Billings that paid well, but made him feel like he was watching his own life through plate glass, through the marriage that had been good for a while, genuinely good, and then slowly not, through the silence that grew between him and his wife like ice across still water, neither of them doing anything dramatic wrong, just 2 people who had ended up on opposite sides of something they couldn't name. Through all of it, Atlas had been the constant, the one thing that stayed exactly what it was. Cole tilted his head back against the headrest and looked at the ceiling of the cab. Someone had scratched something into the fabric up there years ago before he owned this truck. He had never been able to make out what it said. He looked at it now, the way he had looked at it 100 times before. The same letters? The same illegible angle? The same inability to make it mean anything. He closed his eyes. He had a general idea of what came next. There was a man named Gerald Puett who ran a ranch supply store on the north side of Cutter's Creek, a man Cole had met twice at a veteran support event in Billings 3 years back. Gerald had told him, both times, that if Cole ever found himself in the area, he should stop in. People said things like that. Cole had learned not to hold them to it, but Gerald had said it twice. And the second time he had said it, he had pressed a business card into Cole's hand and said it the way people said things they meant, not the way people said things to fill silence. That business card was in the glove compartment. Cole would go in the morning when the shop opened, and he would figure out what came next from there. Atlas shifted beside him and made a low sound that Cole recognized. Not a warning, not discomfort, just the sound the dog made when he wanted Cole to understand he was present. Cole opened his eyes and looked at him. "All right," he said. "We'll figure it out." The morning came in slow and gray, the way Montana mornings came in November, light arriving more as a gradual lessening of darkness than as anything bright. Cole was awake before it fully arrived, as he almost always was. Old habit. He let the truck warm up, poured water from a jug into a bowl for Atlas, and ate the last granola bar from the bag behind his seat. Atlas ate from the dry food container Cole kept behind the driver's seat. They ate in silence, watching the frost lift off the windshield as the defroster finally won its argument with the cold. Gerald Puett's ranch supply store was called simply Puett's, a long, low building with a corrugated metal roof and a hand-painted sign that had faded to the point where the name was more memory than text. The parking lot was already busy at 7:30 in the morning, which told Cole something about the kind of town Cutter's Creek was. A working town, up before the sun, no use for sleeping in. He parked at the far end of the lot and clipped Atlas's lead, and the two of them walked toward the entrance with the particular kind of quiet dignity that comes from having nothing left to hide behind. Gerald Puett recognized him before Cole had fully gotten through the door. He was a broad man in his late 50s, with a face like weathered hardwood, and the kind of handshake that meant something. He came around the counter without hesitation, hand extended, and there was nothing in his expression that resembled pity, which Cole appreciated more than he could have articulated. "Cole Hargrove," Gerald said. "You made it up here." "I did," Cole said. Gerald looked down at Atlas, who sat beside Cole's boot, and regarded Gerald with the measured attention he gave everyone on first meeting. Not hostile, just thorough. Gerald crouched slowly and offered the back of his hand. Atlas sniffed it, and then looked up at Cole as though checking in. Cole gave a small nod. Atlas leaned into Gerald's hand briefly, and then returned to his sitting position. "Good dog," Gerald said, straightening. "What's his name?" "Atlas." Gerald nodded like the name made sense to him. "Come on in the back. I've got coffee." The back of the store was a narrow office stacked with invoices, seed catalogs, and a space heater that was doing its earnest best. Gerald poured coffee from a pot that looked like it had been running since before Cole got to Montana and handed him a mug. Cole drank it and didn't ask what kind it was because it was hot, and that was the only quality that mattered at the moment. Atlas settled on the floor near the door, nose working the air of the unfamiliar space, my ears rotating periodically to catch sounds from the front of the store. Gerald sat down across from him and didn't ask what had brought Cole to Cutter's Creek in November with everything he owned in the back of a truck, because Gerald Puett was the kind of man who had seen enough of the world to know that the story was visible without the words. He asked instead what Cole could do, what Cole had skills in, what Cole was looking for. Cole told him: construction, electrical, structural assessment, water systems, fieldcraft. He had worked in all of these things, both in the service and out of it. He was not a man with a narrow skill set. Gerald listened with the patience of someone who had spent decades listening to men describe themselves in waiting rooms and back offices just like this one, to measuring the distance between what people said and what they meant. When Cole finished, Gerald was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "There's a property east of town, 8 miles out on the mill race road. Old grist mill. Been sitting empty since the 80s. County took it for back taxes 3 years ago. They've been trying to move it at auction. Nobody's bitten." Cole turned his coffee cup in his hands. "What's the condition? Structural?" "Unknown. Nobody's gone in there seriously in a long time. Roof's still on. Walls are standing from what anyone can see from the road. The mill race itself probably still runs. That creek doesn't stop. But the inside, the machinery, the floor situation, nobody knows." Gerald paused. County would take very little for it. They just want it off the books. Cole looked at him steadily. "Well, why are you telling me this?" Gerald took a drink of his own coffee. "Because you need a place. Because that building needs someone who knows what they're looking at when they go inside it. And because I've been watching properties like that sit empty in this county my whole life, because nobody with the right hands ever showed up at the right time." He set his mug down. "The county assessor is a man named Bryce Dillard. He has an office on Main. If you go see him today and tell him Gerald Puett sent you, he'll talk to you straight." Atlas lifted his head from the floor and looked at Cole. Just looked at him, the way he did sometimes, not asking anything, just making sure Cole knew he was in the room. Cole nodded once. "Okay, all right." The county assessor's office was exactly what Cole expected. A low-ceilinged room with fluorescent lighting, stacks of manila folders, and the particular institutional smell of paper and old coffee that seemed to exist in government buildings, regardless of state or climate. Bryce Dillard was younger than Cole expected, late 30s, with wire-rimmed glasses and the manner of a man who had heard every possible sad story and had learned to filter for the ones that were actually going somewhere. He looked at Cole for a long moment when Cole told him why he was there, then looked at Atlas, who had come inside with Cole and was sitting by the door with his usual measured patience. "The Harlan Mill property," Dillard said, "if that's what the old grist mill on Mill Race Road is called." Dillard pulled a folder from a stack beside his desk with the practiced ease of someone who had been waiting for this particular folder to become relevant. He opened it and laid it flat between them. The property summary was sparse. 8 acres, the mill structure, the mill race and water rights, 2 smaller outbuildings whose condition was listed as unknown, and a minimum bid figure that Cole read twice because it was lower than he had expected by a significant amount. "That's the number?" Cole said. "Nobody's wanted it," Dillard said without judgment. "There are rumors." Cole looked up from the folder. "What kind of rumors?" Dillard took off his glasses and cleaned them with the corner of his shirt, in the way people do when they're deciding how much of something to say. That place has a history. The Harlan family ran it from the 1890s until the last one died in the late 70s. After that, it just sat. Kids used to dare each other to go in there. A hunting party sheltered in it during a bad storm about 15 years ago and came out saying the upper floor was wrong. Wouldn't explain what that meant. The county sent an inspector in about 10 years ago, and he filed a report that said, structurally compromised, recommend demolition, and then never followed up on it. It's been sitting on the books ever since. Cole was quiet. Atlas had stood up from near the door and walked over to stand beside Cole's chair, which was something he did when his attention sharpened. Not alarm exactly, but a kind of heightened presence, like a dial being turned up. "I'll go look at it," Cole said. "You'd be going in at your own risk," Dillard said. "County can't take responsibility." "I understand that." Dillard looked at him for another moment, then looked at Atlas, who was looking at the folder on the desk with the particular focused attention he sometimes gave objects that had recently been handled by many different people, reading the room through what had passed through it. "I'll give you a site access form," Dillard said. "You can go in legally as an interested buyer." Millrace Road was exactly what its name suggested, a road that had once existed to serve the mill and had never quite recovered from the mill's abandonment. It was gravel for the first 4 miles, and then something less than gravel for the remaining 4, so the truck rocking through frozen ruts, while the bare cottonwoods on either side of the road stood in the gray afternoon light, like tall men who had been waiting there a very long time. Atlas rode with his nose pressed to the narrow gap Cole left in the passenger window, drawing in cold air in long, focused inhalations. Not restless, intent. Cole heard the creak before he saw the property. There was a particular sound running water made in cold weather, lower and more deliberate than its summer voice, as though the cold required it to work harder for the same result. Then the trees thinned, and the clearing opened, and there it was. The Harlan Mill sat on a slight rise above the creek, its main structure 3 stories of weathered stone and timber that had settled into the landscape with the permanence of something that had always been there. The roof was intact from what Cole could see. Slate, heavy, the kind of roof that had been built to outlast the people who put it there. The mill race ran beside the structure on the south side, water moving through the stone channel with deliberate purpose, and Cole could see even from the truck that the wheel housing was still standing, though the wheel itself was gone or hidden by the angle of approach. The windows were dark. Several were broken, their gaps filled with what looked like decades of debris, leaves, nesting material, the accumulated refusal of the outside world to stay outside. Vines had climbed the east wall and died there, and climbed again until they were layered in a thick cable that had begun to work itself into the mortar between the stones. It was worse than Cole had imagined. It was also exactly what he had expected. He had learned long ago that the things most worth doing were rarely the things that looked promising from a distance. He put the truck in park and sat for a moment looking at it. Atlas lifted his nose from the window gap and pressed it flat against the glass instead, breath fogging a circle in front of him. Then he made a sound Cole had not heard him make in a long time, a low, sustained note that was not a growl and was not a whine, but something between the two, something that belonged to a specific category of the dog's communication that Cole had learned to pay close attention to. The sound he made when he noticed something that required more investigation before he could tell Cole what he thought about it. "All right," Cole said. "Let's go." He pulled on his work jacket and his gloves, clipped Atlas's lead out of habit, and walked toward the building. The ground between the truck and the mill was uneven, old foundation stones from structures that no longer existed, showing through the frost-stiffened grass like the bones of something buried shallow. Cole picked his way through them with the automatic attention to ground surface he had never been able to turn off, reading the terrain without meaning to, noting the soft spots, the places where the ground held his weight differently. Atlas walked beside him with his head up and his tail carried low and still, not lowered in submission, but held horizontal, which was his working posture, the carriage that meant he was gathering information rather than reacting to it. They stopped 10 feet from the main entrance. The door was heavy oak, its lower third black with old water damage, its iron hardware gone to rust, but still present. The door was not fully closed. There was a gap of 3 or 4 inches on the hinge side, where the frame had shifted over the years, and the door no longer met it flush. From inside that gap came a smell that Cole registered before he could categorize it. Cold stone, old wood, something mineral and dark that the creek contributed through the mill race, and beneath all of it something else, something that the cold had preserved the way. Cold preserved everything it touched. Atlas stopped walking. He stood completely still, with his nose pointed at the gap in the door, and Cole could see from the movement of the dog's flanks that he was drawing air in long, controlled pulls the way he did when he was working a scent seriously. His ears were pricked hard forward. The fur along his spine rose slightly. Not the sharp, hackle raise of threat response, but the softer elevation Cole associated with intense curiosity. The dog's tail was absolutely still. "What is it?" Cole said quietly. Atlas did not look at him. He kept his eyes and nose fixed on the gap in the door. Then, and Cole had seen this perhaps a dozen times in 8 years, had never learned not to feel it in the base of his spine. The dog sat down. Not the automatic sit of an obedient dog responding to a command, not the impatient sit of a dog waiting for permission. The deliberate sit of an animal that has decided something, and that is committed to a position, that is communicating something specific by the act of choosing not to move. Cole had never yet ignored this. He pulled the door open. It moved with the groan of swollen wood and displaced decades, and stepped inside. The interior of the mill was vast and dim, and smelled of everything the gap in the door had promised. The main floor was wide, its timber boards still present, but warped and heaved into a landscape of gentle ridges and sudden drops, the wood gone silver gray and fibrous with age. The ceiling above him was the underside of the second floor, its beams visible and intact, though wrapped in the accumulated debris of 100 winters' worth of water, intrusion, and animal habitation. Light came in through the broken windows and slanted columns that illuminated spinning dust and the suspended detritus of long abandonment. Insulation foam broken down to pellets, fibrous gray material from what had once been some kind of interior wall treatment, and the dark, geometric shapes of old machinery still present in the northeast corner of the room, unidentifiable at this distance, in this light. Cole stood in the doorway and let his eyes adjust. Atlas walked past him into the room, lead trailing, moving with a measured deliberateness that Cole recognized. Not exploration, navigation. The dog crossed the main floor at a diagonal, stepping over warped boards with the careful placement of his paws that indicated he was reading the floor as he went, trusting no surface fully until he had tested it. And he moved toward the northeast corner where the old machinery sat, then veered away from it before reaching it, and moved instead toward the south wall, toward the mill race side of the building, toward the wall through which Cole could hear the creek running in its stone channel just on the other side. Cole followed at the same careful pace, testing boards, reading the floor. The south wall had a door set into it, smaller than the main entrance, its wood a different color, newer, or at least newer by decades. It was padlocked. The padlock was orange with rust, but when Cole crouched and looked at it, he saw that it had not been cut or forced. It had been locked and left. Atlas was at this door now, nose to the gap at its base, drawing air through it with deep, focused intention. The fur along the dog's spine rose again, then fell, then rose once more. Cole put his hand flat against the door and stood there listening. The creak, the wind finding its way through the broken windows, the tick of old wood responding to his weight and the dog's weight, and the slight change in temperature their presence created. And something else, lower than these things, that Cole would not have noticed if he had not learned in very specific and costly ways to listen for it. A regularity in the sound that was not random, that repeated on a pattern that no natural process produced. He stood very still and listened for a long time. Atlas sat down again, that deliberate, committed sit. Cole looked at the padlock, then at the door, then at the padlock again. He was a man who had made a career of distinguishing between what was his business and what was not, between the invitation and the trespass, between the moment that called for patience and the moment that called for the opposite. He had the site access form in his jacket pocket. He was here as a potential buyer, within his legal right to inspect the property. The door was padlocked from the outside, which meant someone had put that lock there. Someone who was not the county, because the county had listed the structure as uninspected and inaccessible. Someone who had been here after the county stopped coming. He took out his phone and photographed the padlock. He photographed the door, its frame, the gap at its base where Atlas's nose had been. He photographed the floor, the walls, the machinery in the corner. He would do this correctly. He would go back to town and speak to Dillard and find out what, if anything. Now the county knew about this padlock. He would learn what he could before he moved. He could do this. He had been trained in exactly this kind of restraint, the restraint of a man who knows that patience is not in action, but a different kind of action entirely. He put his hand on Atlas's collar and turned toward the main door. Atlas did not move. "Come," Cole said. Atlas looked at him with those amber eyes, steady, measuring, and then looked back at the padlocked door. His tail was still. His body was absolutely decided. Cole crouched beside him. "I hear it too," he said quietly. "We're coming back." The drive back into Cutter's Creek was 12 miles, and Cole spent most of it thinking about sound patterns and padlocks, and the particular quality of the air behind that south wall door, and the way Atlas had sat down. The dog rode with his head between the seats, rather than at the window, which was not his usual posture. And Cole understood this as Atlas choosing to stay close to him rather than monitor the world outside. A choice the dog made when they were in the middle of something he considered important. The county assessor's office was closed by the time Cole got back to Main Street. He parked and sat for a moment, and then pulled out his phone and found Gerald Pewett's number from the business card and called. Gerald answered on the second ring. "The Harlan Mill," Cole said. "There's a padlocked interior door on the south wall. The county inspector's report say anything about that? A pause on the line. Not that I know of. Where'd you say it was? South wall, mill race side. Heavy padlock, old, but not forced. Someone put that on intentionally. Another pause, longer this time. Cole, the Harlan family's last surviving member, daughter of the last owner. She died about 6 years ago. Left no heirs that anyone knew of. But the story around here was that before she died, she went back out to the mill. Alone. Spent a day there. Nobody knew what she was doing. Wouldn't say. Gerald paused again. I don't think the county ever knew about that door. Cole was quiet for a moment. Then, who put the padlock on? If she went there alone and she's dead. I don't know, Gerald said. Maybe she did. Cole looked at Atlas in the passenger seat. The dog was watching him with those amber eyes, fully present, patient in the specific way he was patient when he knew something was still unfinished. The sound behind that door had repeated. Whatever was on the other side of it was not passive. It was not simply old machinery or settling stone. It was something alive, or something that had been arranged with intention, something that had been doing what it was doing, at that interval, on that pattern, for a very long time. Cole ended the call and sat in the dark of his truck with his dog and thought about what came next. He had $14 and a truck full of furniture he couldn't keep, and a site access form in his jacket pocket, and a building 8 miles east of him that his dog had refused to leave easily, that had a locked door on its south wall, that had a history nobody had ever fully explained. All right, he said, to Atlas, to the dark, to the particular way Montana winters had of making everything feel equally urgent and equally patient at once. Tomorrow. Atlas rested his head on Cole's knee, and for the first time in 3 days, his eyes slowly closed. Cole slept in the truck that night in the parking lot behind Pewett's, which Gerald had told him was fine when Cole came back to return the extra coffee thermos Gerald had pressed on him before closing. Gerald had not made an occasion of it, had simply said, "Backlot's fine. Nobody'll bother you." The way a man says something he has thought about before the words were needed, and Cole had nodded and left it at that. The heater ran on and off through the night in the way the heater did now, cycling into silence at unpredictable intervals, and each time it stopped, Cole felt the cold begin its slow reclamation of the cab. Atlas slept across the back seat with his head on Cole's rolled jacket, the dog's breathing slow and even and entirely certain in the way the breathing of animals was certain. No part of him spending energy on worry that could not be resolved by morning. Cole lay in the front with his boots on and looked at the ceiling, the illegible scratching above him. He thought about sound patterns. He thought about padlocks. He thought about a woman driving out to a mill on a property she no longer owned and spending a day there and driving back and telling no one what she had done. He thought about Atlas sitting down. In 8 years, Cole had watched Atlas indicate on training exercises, on real searches in real terrain, on moments in crowded rooms that Cole would never have identified as significant without the dog's input. For he had learned the difference between the dog's exploratory interest and his committed certainty the way you learned the difference between a creak in a building that was settling and a creak that meant the structure was deciding something. Atlas had sat down in the Harlan Mill the way he sat down when he had finished deciding. Not when he was curious, when he was sure. Cole was up before the light changed. He put water down for Atlas and ate nothing because there was nothing left. and he drove to the county assessor's office and was in the parking lot when Bryce Dillard arrived at 8:15. Dillard heard the part about the padlock with his hands wrapped around a cup of gas station coffee, expression neither surprised nor alarmed, which Cole took as a man who had learned to absorb new information about old properties without reactive spending of energy. "We don't have any record of interior modifications," Dillard said. "If that padlock is there, whoever put it there did it without our knowledge. Can I open it?" "You have site access as an interested buyer." Dillard looked at him over the coffee cup. "Site access covers inspection of all accessible areas of the structure. A locked door is not an accessible area. A door on county-owned property that has been locked by an unauthorized party," Dillard said carefully, "is a different matter. The lock itself has no legal standing. No one had the right to put it there. If you document what you find before and after, I have no objection to your removing an unauthorized lock in order to complete your inspection." Cole looked at him steadily. "Document everything," Dillard said again. It was clear this was as much instruction as it was permission. The hardware store on 2nd Street opened at 7:30. Cole spent $4 of his $14 on a bolt cutter, which left him 10, and drove Mill Race Road again with Atlas riding in his working posture, head between the seats, nose forward, monitoring the cab's atmosphere with the baseline attentiveness he maintained when they were moving towards something he considered unfinished. The mill in morning light was a different structure than it had been in the flat gray of the previous afternoon. Now light came over the ridge to the east and caught the stone of its walls at an angle that revealed the construction beneath the age, the careful coursing of the limestone blocks, the deliberate thickness of the walls at the foundation, the way the building had been placed in relation to the creek, not just for function, but for permanence. Someone had built this to last. Someone had made choices in 1891 or 1892, or whenever it was that these walls went up, choices about depth and angle and material, that they intended to serve people who had not yet been born. Cole stood in front of it for a moment before going in. Atlas stood beside him, ears forward, tail carried in his working posture, reading the morning through his nose with long, quiet inhalations. "All right," Cole said. Inside, the mill in morning light was better and worse than it had been the afternoon before. Better because he could see the bones of it clearly. The beam structure overhead was sound. The stone walls were solid. The floor was damaged, but not catastrophically. Not in ways that couldn't be addressed with the right approach and enough time. Worse because in full light he could see the evidence of what the building had been through. Water lines on the walls at 3 different heights, the record of 3 different significant floods, the stain of old fires in 2 corners that had burned and gone out, the decades of animal habitation whose debris had accumulated in the corners into a thick, undifferentiated mass of organic material. The northeast machinery, a great iron arrangement of gears and shafts, its function now only guessable, stood in its corner, draped in what had once been canvas and was now a gray felted material closer to felt than fabric, every surface of it speaking to decades of moisture and cold. Atlas crossed the main floor at his diagonal again, the same path as before, and went directly to the south wall door. Cole followed. The padlock in morning light was more legible than it had been in the dim afternoon. It was a heavy mechanism, not the kind of lock you bought at a hardware store for a few dollars. This was a serious lock, the kind used on equipment trailers and high-value storage. The keyhole had a small cap over it, hinged, which suggested the lock was intended for outdoor use and had been selected by someone who expected it to be outside for a long time. The lock body was orange-brown with rust, but when Cole pressed the shackle, he felt resistance that was mechanical, not corrosion. The mechanism was still functional inside the weathered exterior. He photographed it from 4 angles. He photographed the door, the frame, the gap at the base. He photographed Atlas standing beside the door, which he did not usually do, but which felt necessary in the way certain things felt necessary, without explanation. Then he set the bolt cutter's jaw around the shackle and pressed. The shackle gave with less resistance than he expected, the metal fatigued by years of freeze and thaw, and the lock dropped into his gloved hand in 2 pieces. Cole put them in his jacket pocket. He put his hand on the door handle, which was a simple iron bar, and pressed it down. The door swung inward. The smell that came out of the space beyond was the same smell he had caught through the gap the day before, but concentrated now and full. Stone and water and cold and something else. Something that the cold had kept close to itself for a long time. Cole stood in the doorway and let his eyes find the light. The room beyond the door was smaller than the main mill floor, perhaps 20 feet by 12, its ceiling lower, its walls the same limestone construction, but here unplastered, raw stone. It was clearly a utility space, a workroom or storage area connected to the mill race operation. The floor here was stone rather than timber, the same limestone as the walls, and it was damp in the way of a room that never fully dried, never fully removed itself from the creek that ran immediately outside its south wall. Light came through a single window, whose glass was intact, the only intact window Cole had seen in the building, and the glass was old, wavy with age, the kind of glass that distorted what passed through it into something slightly impressionistic. Atlas walked past Cole into the room without pausing at the threshold. Cole followed. The room was not empty. Along the east wall, stacked with the deliberate organization of someone who had thought carefully about preservation, were wooden crates. 8 of them, Cole counted, of varying sizes, constructed from a pale wood that had aged to a soft gray but had not rotted. They were sealed with the same care as the lock on the door. Each lid fitted tightly, the joints wrapped in what appeared to be waxed canvas tape that had dried and cracked with age, but still held its basic sealing function. On the face of each crate, written in black paint in a hand that was precise and unhurried, was a single word or a short phrase. Cole could read some from where he stood. One said, "Records." One said, "Correspondence." One said, "Machinery, Harlan patent." One, the largest, said simply, "Ruth." Atlas was at this last crate now, the one that said Ruth, nose to its base, drawing air through the gap between the stone floor and the crate's bottom edge in the deep, controlled pulls of serious attention. His tail was still. His ears were absolute. Then he looked back at Cole with those amber eyes and made the low, sustained sound again, the one between a growl and a whine, the one that meant, "This is the thing. This is what I brought you here for." Cole crouched in front of the crate marked Ruth and put his hand flat on its lid and stayed there. He was not a man who moved quickly through significant moments. The service had burned that tendency out of him early, the tendency to treat discovery as permission to act, to confuse the finding of something with the understanding of it. He stayed crouched with his hand on the lid and breathed the cold air of the room and let himself simply be inside the moment without yet doing anything about it. Atlas sat down. "I know," Cole said. "I know." He stood, took his phone out, and began documenting the room systematically. Every wall, every crate, every label, the window, the floor, the ceiling, the door from the inside, the condition of the wax tape sealing on each crate. He did this without rushing, eyed with the methodical patience of someone who had learned that the first time you document something is the only time you can document it as it was. Then he called Dillard. "There's a sealed room on the south wall," Cole said when Dillard answered. 8 sealed crates. One of them is labeled with a name. Ruth. I'm sending you photographs. A long pause. "Have you opened any of them?" "No." "Don't." Another pause. Ruth Harlan was the last surviving member of the family. The daughter I told you about. The one who died 6 years ago. Ruth Harlan Becker. She changed her name when she married. His voice had shifted into something more careful. "Cole, if she put those crates there before she died, they may constitute part of her estate. I need to make some calls." "How long do you need?" "Give me until end of day. Don't open anything. Or don't move anything." Another pause. "Don't tell anyone else what you found yet." Cole looked at Atlas, who was still sitting in front of the crate marked Ruth, with the quality of attention he gave things he had decided were important. "Understood," Cole said. "If this story has you hooked, and I think it has, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what comes next. Every story on this channel is told with everything I've got, and your support is the reason I keep making them. Thank you for being here." He spent the rest of the morning in the mill, but not in the south room. He left that room as he had found it, and pulled the damaged door closed behind him, and spent his time instead on the main floor, moving through the space with the systematic attention he gave structural assessments, nor reading the building the way a building needed to be read, from the foundation up, from the outside load-in, from the evidence of what water and cold and time had done to it, and from the evidence of what it had refused to allow them to do. The walls were sound. He could see this clearly once he was inside them, running his hands along the mortar joints, finding the places where water had worked, and the places where the stone had simply held. The floor was the primary problem on the main level. Perhaps 30% of the timber boards would need to be replaced, and the subfloor situation beneath them was unknown until he could get under the building, which required clearing the debris from the crawl access in the northwest corner. The roof, which had looked intact from outside, showed evidence of 2 localized failures in the northeast quadrant that had been partially addressed by someone at some point. There was newer lumber up there among the old, rough patches that had slowed the damage without stopping it. These patches had held for what looked like 15 or 20 years. They would not hold another full winter. He cataloged all of this in a notebook he kept in his jacket pocket, the same kind of black, weather-worn notebook he had carried since the service, filling pages with the shorthand of structural observation, load points, compromise zones, material conditions, priority of intervention. The mill, despite everything, was salvageable. A building this well constructed, this solidly founded, could be brought back from where it was if the right person gave it the right kind of attention. Oh, Cole had seen worse come back. He had helped bring worse back, in conditions considerably less forgiving than a Montana winter. Atlas moved through the space with him, checking in every few minutes by pressing his flank against Cole's leg or appearing at his side from whatever corner he had been investigating. 3 times during the morning, The dog went back to the south wall door and stood near it, not asking to go inside, just noting its presence, maintaining the thread of attention he had established there. Cole noticed each time and said nothing, understanding that Atlas was doing what Atlas did, keeping the map. At midday, Cole drove back to town and ate at the diner on Main Street with his last $10. The waitress, a woman of about 60, with an expression of complete competence and the air of someone who had seen every variety of person come through a small-town diner door, brought him coffee without asking and a bowl of water for Atlas without being asked, setting it on the floor beside the booth without comment, as though this were simply what a person did. Cole ate a plate of eggs and toast and did not waste energy on what came after the $10, because what came after the $10 was a problem for after he had eaten. The diner had 4 other customers when Cole came in, 2 men at the counter in work jackets who were talking about a fence line situation, and a couple in a corner booth who were not talking at all, but in a companionable way. By the time Cole had finished his eggs, the counter had filled, and 2 more booths were occupied, and the conversation in the room had shifted in the way small-town diner conversation shifted, gradually, without announcement, toward the new subject. The new subject was Cole. He was aware of it the way he was aware of most things people believed they were conducting below his notice. The man at the counter directly to Cole's left, mid-50s, heavy set, the particular combination of confidence and local permanence that came from having lived in a place all your life, had been glancing at Atlas every 30 seconds since Cole sat down. Not with hostility exactly, with the assessment of a man deciding what category to put something in. "That's a working dog," the man said finally. Not to Cole, to the man beside him, but pitched for Cole to hear. Cole did not look up from his coffee. "Military," the man beside him said, also not to Cole. "Dogs like that don't end up out here without a reason," the first man said. There was something in his voice that was trying to sound like authority without quite landing on it. Cole set down his coffee cup and looked at the man directly. The man met his eyes for about 2 seconds, and then found something on his plate more interesting. The waitress appeared at Cole's elbow with the coffee pot. "Don't mind Dale," she said quietly. "He has opinions about everything and information about none of it." "I'm not minding him," Cole said. "Good policy." She refilled his cup. "You're the one who went out to the Harlan Mill." Cole looked at her. "Word travels fast." "Bryce Dillard's wife is my cousin," she said without embarrassment. She didn't tell me anything. But Bryce called Gerald Pewitt, and Gerald called his wife, and his wife is in a book club with your cousin, Cole said. "With me," she said. "Gerald's wife and I are in a book club." She set the coffee pot down on the table, which was not standard waitress practice, but suggested she had something to say and was going to take the time to say it. "The Harlan Mill has been sitting out there since I was in high school. My grandmother knew Margaret Harlan, the mother, Ruth's mother. And she used to say that Margaret Harlan was a woman who knew things she never talked about. Things about that mill, about that property, about what the Harlan family had been doing out there, beyond grinding grain." She looked at Cole directly. "Whatever you found in there, and I can see from looking at you that you found something, it's going to matter to people in this town. It's going to matter to people who've been waiting a long time to understand something they were never told." Cole looked at her for a moment. "What's your name?" "Loretta," she said. "I haven't found anything yet," Cole said, which was true in the sense that he had found things, but had not yet understood them. Loretta picked up the coffee pot. "Well," she said, when you do." He was back at the county assessor's office at 4 o'clock. Dillard was on the phone when Cole came in and held up one finger without looking up. Cole sat in the chair across the desk with Atlas at his feet and waited. Jim Atlas watched Dillard with professional attention, not because Dillard was threatening, but because Dillard held information. And Atlas had always been sensitive to the difference between people who knew things and people who were guessing. Dillard hung up and leaned back in his chair. His expression had the quality of a man who had spent the afternoon talking to people and had arrived somewhere he had not anticipated arriving. "Ruth Harlan Becker died intestate," Dillard said. "No will that was ever filed. She had no children. Her husband predeceased her by 2 years. The estate went into a standard administrative process. Her personal property was cataloged and distributed according to state law. But," he paused, "the property at Mill Race Road was already county-owned by the time she died. It had been taken for tax default 8 years before her death, so anything she put in that building after the county took ownership is on county property," Cole said. "Is on county property," Dillard agreed, "which means it is now, technically, county-owned property." He looked at Cole carefully. "However, there is a question of whether what's in those crates has historical significance. I made a call this afternoon to the Montana Historical Society. They have a field officer who can be here in 2 days. Until she looks at what you found and determines whether it qualifies for any kind of preservation designation, I would like everything left exactly as it is." 2 days, Cole said. 2 days. Dillard looked at him. "I assume you're planning to make an offer on the property." "I am. The minimum bid is what you saw in the folder." He paused. "I can tell you, as the assessor, that the county's interest is in moving this property to someone who will use it and maintain it, not in maximizing the sale price." Another pause. "That's all I can tell you." Cole looked at him for a moment. "The woman from the Historical Society, what's she going to be looking for when she gets here?" "Evidence of historical significance, artifacts, documents, records. Things that tell a story about Montana's past that isn't already told." Dillard leaned forward slightly. "If what's in those crates qualifies, and from what you've described, some of it might, the county would have obligations. To preserve it, to make it accessible. That kind of designation changes what you can do with the property, but it also changes what the county needs from you." He looked at Cole carefully. "A buyer who is willing to work with a historical designation, who has the skills to restore a structure to the point where it can be accessed and maintained, who is present and committed. That's a buyer the county has significant interest in supporting." Cole did not answer immediately. He let the weight of what was being said land without rushing toward it. Atlas shifted at his feet and pressed his head against Cole's shin, the grounding touch he offered when Cole was processing something large. 2 days, Cole said again. 2 days. He slept that night in the truck again, in the back lot of Puett's, but differently than the night before, with the particular quality of sleep that comes when the path forward has become visible, even if it has not yet been traveled. The cold was the same cold. The heater cycled the same way. The scratching on the cab ceiling remained illegible. But Cole lay on his back in the narrow space and felt, for the first time in a long time, the specific sensation of being in motion even while completely still. Atlas slept across the back seat and dreamed something that made his paws twitch. The next morning, Cole returned to the mill before 8 o'clock and spent the day doing what he would have done if the south room had not existed. Working. He cleared the debris from the crawl access in the northwest corner and went under the main floor with a flashlight and spent 2 hours on his stomach in the frozen dark beneath the building, reading the foundation. He emerged with mud on his jacket and certainty in his assessment. The foundation was limestone block, and it was sound, deeper than he had expected, poured into the bedrock at places, the work of people who had understood that a building sitting this close to a working creek needed to be rooted in something below the reach of water. The floor joists were old-growth timber, much of them still functional. The damage concentrated in the areas directly under the known roof failures. He spent the afternoon removing the worst of the roof failure damage from inside, on using a crowbar he found in the machinery corner to pry loose the compromised boards in the northeast quadrant, stacking them against the east wall in a pile that would serve as firewood. The work was the kind of work he had always found grounding, physical, precise, producing visible results. Each board he cleared was a problem solved. Each problem solved was evidence that the building had a future. Atlas spent the day moving between the main floor and the exterior of the building, maintaining his systematic monitoring of the property. Twice, Cole heard him stop and hold his attention on the south wall from outside, the particular stillness that meant the dog was listening through the stone. Each time, Cole looked up from what he was doing and noted it and returned to work. At 3 in the afternoon, a truck came down Millrace Road. Cole heard it a long time before it arrived. The road amplified sound in the cold air, and he came out of the mill and stood in the clearing to watch it come. Atlas came from somewhere on the south side of the building and positioned himself beside Cole, close, which was not his usual posture during working hours. He was close because the truck was not Gerald Puett's and was not Bryce Dillard's and was not from the county. It was a white pickup, current model, with a magnetic sign on the door that Cole could read when it pulled into the clearing. Western Legacy Holdings, LLC, Billings, MT. The man who got out was perhaps 45, in a jacket that had never seen genuine field work, carrying a clipboard that he was looking at rather than looking at Cole, which was a specific kind of management effect Cole had encountered in various contexts and had never found informative. The man finally looked up. He took in Cole, then Atlas, then the mill behind them, and arrived at an expression that was attempting friendly while containing something else underneath it. "This is the Harlan property," the man said. It was not quite a question. "It is," Cole said. "I'm Boyd Strant, Western Legacy Holdings. We have an interest in this site." He consulted the clipboard. "We've been in discussions with Cutters Creek County about an acquisition." "For what purpose?" Cole said. Strant's smile adjusted slightly. "Recreational development. There's a significant market in this corridor for high-end retreat properties. A site like this, the water feature, the stone structure, the acreage, it has considerable potential." Cole said nothing. Atlas was watching Strant with the quiet, sustained attention he gave people he had not yet categorized. "Are you associated with the county?" Strant asked. "I'm an interested buyer," Cole said. Strant's expression shifted again, this time into something that worked hard at being collegial and arrived somewhere slightly short of it. "Well, we've been in contact with the assessor's office about a competitive bid process. There isn't one," Cole said. "The property is at county auction minimum. First qualified buyer." "I was told there would be a process." "You were told incorrectly." Cole looked at him steadily. I'd suggest you call Bryce Dillard and confirm the terms. A pause. Strant looked past Cole at the mill, and Cole watched his eyes move over the building, the way a person's eyes moved over something they were pricing rather than seeing. The stone walls, the mill race, the slate roof, the acreage. The whole equation resolved in his expression into a number. Historical designation would complicate things, Strant said, still looking at the building rather than Cole. It was a test, floating the information to see what Cole knew, watching for the reaction. Yes, Cole said. It would. Strant looked at him. Something moved through his expression that Cole could not name precisely, the recognition of someone meeting a counterpart they had not anticipated. You know about that. I do. Another pause. Then Strant took a card from his jacket pocket and held it out. Cole took it. He would not be calling it, but he took it. Fine, if the situation changes, Strant said. It won't, Cole said. Strant got back in his truck. He backed out of the clearing with more care than he had come in with, which Cole interpreted as a man who had recalculated something. The truck disappeared back up Mill Race Road, and the sound of it faded into the particular silence of the property. The creek, the wind and the bare trees. The quality of attentiveness the mill itself seemed to contribute to the quiet. Atlas watched until the truck was gone. Then he looked at Cole, and then he looked at the south wall of the mill. And the look moved between these two things with an intention that was unmistakable. The stakes had just clarified. Western Legacy Holdings had been talking to the county. Whatever was in those crates, whatever Ruth Harlan Becker had sealed behind that padlocked door, now was sitting on property that a recreational development company with a Billings address had been pursuing. If the historical designation didn't come through, if the county auction process moved before Cole could make his offer, if the field officer from the Historical Society arrived and found nothing of significance in those crates, nothing that rose to the level of preservation designation. Cole looked at the south wall. Atlas looked at the south wall. Then Atlas walked toward it. Not the searching trot of a dog checking in on something. The direct, purposeful walk of a dog who has decided the time for waiting is over. Cole followed. At the south wall door, still unlatched, the broken padlock in Cole's jacket pocket. Atlas stopped. He turned and looked at Cole. He made no sound. He simply looked at him. And in the amber eyes was the entire argument. We have found this. We have waited. We have been patient. And now something else is here. Cole opened the door. The room was as he had left it. 8 crates in the afternoon, light through the wavy old glass, their labels legible, their wax tape seals intact. The room's smell unmistakable. Stone and cold water and time, and something underneath all of that, which Cole now recognized as the particular smell of paper, of documents, of the kept record of things that mattered to someone who no longer existed to keep them. Atlas went to the crate marked Youth. He put his nose to its sealed lid and drew air through the hairline gap of the fitted joint for a long moment. Then he sat back and looked at Cole with the steadiness of complete certainty. Cole crouched in front of the crate. He put his hands on its lid and felt the cool of the sealed wood through his gloves. In 24 hours, the woman from the Historical Society would be here. In 24 hours, he would know whether what was in this room constituted something the county was obligated to protect, something that Western Legacy Holdings could not simply price and purchase and turn into a retreat property for people who had money and no particular need for what this land had been. In 24 hours, he would know whether the sealed room and the 8 crates and the woman who had come here alone before she died had left something that mattered in the way that things needed to matter to change the course of what happened next. But Atlas had already decided. The dog's certainty was in the room with them like a third presence, warm and absolute in the cold stone air. Cole looked at the label on the crate. Ruth. Not a category. Not a description of contents. A name. The name she had given the crate that held whatever she had most needed to preserve. Cole's hand stayed on the lid. He did not open it. He would do this correctly, in the right order, with the right witness present. He would wait until tomorrow. But he stayed crouched in front of that crate for a long time in the fading afternoon light, with Atlas beside him breathing slow and certain, both of them inside the accumulated gravity of a room that had been waiting, perhaps for a very long time, for the right person to find the door. Well, the field officer from the Montana Historical Society arrived at 10 in the morning in a dark green state vehicle that handled Mill Race Road, with more confidence than most vehicles did, which told Cole something about the woman driving it before he saw her face. Her name was Dr. Carol Fenwick, and she was perhaps 60, compact and purposeful in the way of someone who had spent decades moving through difficult terrain toward things worth understanding. She shook Cole's hand at the clearing's edge, looked at the mill for a long moment without speaking, and then looked at Atlas, who was sitting beside Cole in his formal posture. "Working dog," she said. "He found the room," Cole said. She looked at Atlas for another moment, then back at the mill. "Show me." Inside the south room, Doctor. Fenwick moved differently than Cole had expected, not with the careful institutional caution of someone protecting themselves from liability, but with the direct, hands-close attention of someone who had been waiting to be in rooms like this one for a long time. She went to the crates, slowly, reading each label, her hands behind her back, not touching, only reading. When she reached the crate marked Ruth, she stopped. Atlas, who had come into the room behind them and settled near the door, stood up. Dr. Fenwick looked at the label for a long time. Then she looked at Cole. "Do you know who Ruth was?" "Ruth Harlan Becker, last of the family. She came here 6 years ago before she died, and no one knows why." "She came here to do this," Dr. Fenwick said, and she said it with the certainty of someone completing a sentence that had been left unfinished for 6 years. Then she crouched in front of the crate, took a small tool from her jacket pocket, and began carefully working at the wax tape seal along the lid's front edge. Cole stayed where he was. He did not help, and she did not ask him to. Atlas moved from the door and came to stand beside Cole, pressed against his leg, warm and steady. The tape gave slowly, releasing in sections, the decades-hardened wax crumbling away from the wood, in pale flakes that fell to the stone floor without sound. Dr. Fenwick worked without rushing, the seal along the left edge, then the right, then the back. Then she put both hands on the lid and looked up at Cole. "Whatever this is," she said quietly, "it was put here for someone to find." "I know," Cole said. She lifted the lid. The cold of the room seemed to deepen for a moment, the way cold deepened when something was opened that had been sealed for a long time, the temperature equalizing between what had been contained and what surrounded it. Cole could not see into the crate from where he stood. He watched Dr. Fenwick's face instead, watched the shift in her expression as her eyes moved over what was inside, the careful professional control giving way to something more direct, something that was not quite shock, but was in the neighborhood of awe. She reached in with both hands gently and lifted out a bundle of papers bound with brown cotton twine. She set it on her knee and looked at it for a moment. Then she lifted out another bundle. Then, a leather journal, its cover cracked with age but intact. Then a smaller bundle wrapped in oilcloth, tied with a separate piece of twine. Then, at the bottom of the crate, something that Cole could see even from across the room, a photograph mounted on stiff backing board, the kind of formal portrait photograph that had been made in the late 19th century, when having your photograph taken was an occasion. Dr. Fenwick picked up the photograph last and held it carefully and looked at it. Then she looked at Cole. "Come here," she said. He crossed the room. He crouched beside her and looked at the photograph. It showed the interior of the mill, the main floor, recognizable even through the century of change that had occurred since. The same limestone walls, the same beam structure overhead. And in the photograph, on the mill floor, were people. Perhaps 30 of them, adults and children, are crowded together in the space, some seated on the floor, some standing. They were thin in the way of people who had been thin for a long time. They were looking at the camera with the expressions of people who had recently been somewhere worse than where they were now. At the front of the group stood a man and a woman. The man tall, serious, his hand resting on the shoulder of a boy beside him. The woman was small, dark-haired, looking directly at the camera with an expression Cole could not quite name. Not pride exactly. Something more private than pride. On the back of the photograph, in that same precise, unhurried hand Cole had seen on the crate labels, someone had written, "Winter of 1936. 41 souls. The mill held them all." Cole read it twice. Then he sat back on his heels and stayed with it. "The depression," Dr. Fenwick said. She was unwrapping the oilcloth bundle now, hands careful, voice carrying the particular quietness of someone inside something significant. The winter of 1936 was catastrophic in this part of Montana. Farms failed. Families lost everything. There are records of displacement, but the records are incomplete. We've never fully understood where people went, how they survived, who helped them. She opened the oilcloth and looked at what was inside. More photographs, more paper, and her breath came out slowly. "The Harlans kept them here, in the mill." Cole looked at her. "For how long?" "The whole winter, from what I can see. There are names here. Lists. 41 people. Margaret Harlan kept their names." She was reading now, her eyes moving quickly over the pages of the leather journal. She recorded everything. Who came, when they came, what they needed, what the mill provided. She ground grain through the entire winter to feed them. The mill race kept running. The creek doesn't freeze, you said. She looked up at Cole. This is not a footnote. This is a chapter that was never written. 41 people survived that winter because of this building and the people who ran it, and nobody has known that until right now. Atlas made a sound from across the room, the low, sustained note, the one between things, the one that meant something had been confirmed rather than discovered. Cole looked at him. The dog was sitting beside the crate marked Ruth, and he was looking at Cole with those amber eyes, and the expression in them, if an expression could carry this, was something close to, "This is what I knew was here." Dr. Fenwick set down the journal and looked at the crate. "Ruth came here 6 years ago, knowing she was dying, and she sealed everything her mother had kept. She sealed it in a place where the stone walls and the cold would preserve it. She locked the door so nothing would disturb it before the right person found it. She paused. She was waiting for someone to find it. She couldn't have known anyone would, Cole said. No, Dr. Fenwick said. She hoped. She looked at him steadily. People do that. They preserve things in hope rather than certainty. It's the most human impulse there is. Cole was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the creek ran in its stone channel, the same water it had run in the winter of 1936, the same cold, persistent current that had kept the millstone turning through a catastrophic winter while 41 people sheltered in the space above it. But the building around him had not simply been abandoned. It had been waiting, the way Ruth had been waiting, the way the sealed room had been waiting, for someone to arrive with the right combination of need and attention and a dog who refused to be redirected. He looked at the crate marked Ruth and understood, for the first time, why she had labeled it with her name rather than its contents. It was not an inventory description. It was a signature. This is from me. This is what I am leaving behind. This is the thing I needed someone to know. Dr. Fenwick called Bryce Dillard from the south room, while Cole walked the main floor of the mill slowly, the length of it and back, his hand trailing along the limestone wall. Atlas walked beside him, not in his working posture now, tail low and easy, in the relaxed carriage of a dog whose work for the day was complete. The voices from the south room were not audible at this end of the building, only a murmur below the sound of the creek and the wind finding its way through the damaged northeast quadrant overhead. Cole stopped at the center of the main floor and looked up at the beam structure above him. He looked at the walls, at the quality of the limestone, at the way the afternoon light came through the windows, the broken ones, and the intact one in the south room equally, each giving a different version of the same gray November light. He stood inside the building, the way you stood inside something you were beginning to understand was yours. Not because he had bought it. Not yet. Because it had chosen him the way certain things chose certain people, not through logic or planning or the reasonable weighing of options, but through the specific gravity of need-meeting capacity at the right moment. He needed a place. The place needed him. His dog had understood this before either of them. Dr. Fenwick appeared in the doorway of the south room. I'm recommending immediate historical designation for the site and preservation status for all materials, she said. Dillard is aware. He's also aware that any pending acquisition discussions with outside parties are now subject to the county's preservation obligations. She paused. Boyd Strant's company called his office this morning to inquire about timeline. I know, Cole said. Dillard would like you to come in tomorrow morning with your offer. Cole looked at her. Well, what do I have to offer? She looked at him for a long moment, at his worn jacket, his work-stained gloves, the black notebook in his pocket, the dog at his feet. She looked at all of it without judgment and without pity, with the same direct attention she had given the crates. You found this, she said. Your dog found this. You documented it properly. You secured it correctly. You waited when waiting was the right thing to do. The county needs someone to restore this building to the point where the Historical Society can make it accessible. That requires someone with structural knowledge, someone who is here, someone who is not going to turn it into a luxury retreat. She paused again. Make your offer. Let Dillard do the rest. That evening, Gerald Pewitt came out to Millrace Road. He came without being asked. which was the kind of thing Gerald did, and he brought 2 thermoses of coffee and a box of food from the diner that Loretta had put together without being told what it was for, which was the kind of thing Loretta did. The 3 of them, Cole, Gerald, Loretta, stood in the clearing in front of the mill in the last gray light of the afternoon and looked at the building while Atlas moved in easy circles around them, checking the perimeter the way he always did, making sure everything that was supposed to be where it was. Loretta told Cole that her grandmother had mentioned once that Margaret Harlan had fed people during the bad years, had said it the way people said things they weren't sure were believed, carefully, quietly, with the preparedness for dismissal already folded into the telling. Loretta's grandmother had been one of those 41 people. She had been 9 years old. She had never known whose name to attach to the kindness or how to find them again to say what needed to be said. Cole did not speak for a long moment after Loretta said this. "She kept the names," he said finally. "Margaret Harlan kept every name." Loretta put her hand over her mouth briefly. Then she'd lowered it. "Of course she did," she said. "Of course." The morning brought a sky that had cleared for the first time since Cole had arrived in Cutter's Creek. Hard blue above the ridge, the kind of blue that only existed in Montana in the cold months, so clear it looked polished. That Cole drove to town with Atlas in the passenger seat and his black notebook in his jacket pocket, and his offer written out in the careful shorthand of a man who had learned to be precise about what he was asking for and honest about what he was offering in return. Bryce Dillard accepted the offer before Cole had finished explaining it. Not because the terms were remarkable. The minimum bid was the minimum bid, and the restoration commitment Cole offered in writing was simply the truth of what he intended to do. Dillard accepted it because it was right, in the specific way that certain things were right when they arrived at the correct moment in the correct form. Boyd Strant's company called the assessor's office that same morning, and Dillard returned the call that afternoon and explained the historical designation and the pending sale in the tone of a man who had been looking forward to making this particular call for several days. Cole did not hear this conversation. He was already back at the mill. He spent the afternoon on the roof, assessing the northeast quadrant failure from above for the first time. The slate was cold under his boots, and the blue sky was enormous above him, and the creek ran below him in its channel with the persistent indifference of water that has been doing what water does for longer than anyone has been watching. Atlas moved below him in the clearing, occasionally sitting to look up at where Cole was, checking in the way he checked in, making sure the map was current, making sure Cole was where he was supposed to be. The roof needed 2 weeks of serious work. The floor needed 4. The mill race housing needed assessment before the wheel could be considered. The interior, the walls, the windows, the machinery in the northeast corner, was a project of months, patient and sequential, each stage unlocking the next. Cole could see all of it from up here on the roof with the cold air in his lungs and the blue sky overhead. Not as a weight, not as an obstacle, but as a plan. A sequence of solvable problems with a solvable result at the end of them. He was good at this. He had always been good at this. The service had used this capacity, and the years after the service had not, and the absence of use had felt, without his being able to name it, like a form of diminishment, like a tool left out in weather. He was not diminished. He was here. He had arrived by the longest possible route, through divorce and debt and frozen parking lots, and $14 and a dog who refused to be redirected from a padlocked door, and he had arrived at a building that needed exactly what he had. Atlas barked once from the clearing below. Short, bright. The bark he used when he wanted Cole to know he had found something worth noting. Cole looked over the edge of the roof. The dog was sitting in the clearing looking up at him, with his ears forward and his tail swaying in a slow, certain arc. The way it moved when the work was done. And what remained was simply being present in the place where the work had led. Cole looked at him for a moment. Then he looked out across the property, the creek, the bare cottonwoods, and the 8 acres of land that had been waiting as long as the building had been waiting, as long as the sealed room had been waiting, as long as the 41 names in Margaret Harlan's careful handwriting had been waiting for someone to read them. "I know," Cole said. He climbed down from the roof as the last of the afternoon light left the ridge and stood in the clearing with Atlas beside him, both of them looking at the mill in the blue-gray of the coming dark. The building held the light differently now than it had when Cole first saw it. Or perhaps Cole held it differently, which amounted to the same thing. The creek ran. The cottonwood stood in the cold. The slate roof held the last warmth of the November sky and gave it back slowly. Cole put his hand on Atlas's back and stood there. He had come to Cutter's Creek with $14 and a truck full of furniture he couldn't keep, and a dog who was the only constant left in his life after everything else had been subtracted. He had arrived at the end of one story and found, the way people sometimes found things when they stopped trying to find them, that another story had been here the entire time. A story sealed behind a padlocked door, waiting in the cold, preserved by the same winter that had made it necessary. The mill would take years to fully restore. He understood this and was not troubled by it. A man who had spent his adult life building things in difficult conditions understood that the longest projects were the ones most worth completing. He would live here, in the building itself at first, in whatever corner could be made habitable. And he would work from the outside in, from the structural to the finished, from survival to something that deserved the word home. People would come eventually. Dr. Fenwick had said so, and Cole believed her. People came to places where history had been kept rather than lost, where someone had cared enough to lock a door and trust that the right key would arrive. The school groups, the researchers, the descendants of people whose names were in a leather journal inside a sealed crate. They would come, and Cole would open the door for them, which was what the building had always been for. And Atlas would be there. At Cole's side, ears forward, amber eyes reading whatever room they were in, certain in the specific way he had always been certain. Not about outcomes, not about the future, but about what was worth staying for. The dark came fully over Cutter's Creek, and the stars appeared above the ridge in their cold, specific abundance, and the creek ran, and the mill stood, and Cole Hargrove and his dog stood in front of it in the quiet. Not hollow the way Cole had been hollow in that freezing parking lot, not empty, not diminished. Full for the first time in a long time. Home for the first time in longer than that. Thank you for staying until the end. It means more than I can say. If this story moved you, the videos on your screen right now were chosen because I think you'll feel the same way about them. Go watch one, and if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time. I'll see you in the next story.